Welcome back. In a political environment of dwindling state aid, Wisconsin taxpayers broke all kinds of records this year in approving extra money for schools and other local government agencies. That's according to a new report out by the Wisconsin Policy Forum, finding taxpayers approved more than $1.7 billion in spending in the spring and fall election cycles this year. The forum's senior research associate, Ari Brown, joins me next. Ari, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So the bulk of this went to schools, as I understand it. So how does it shake out between spending on, say, basic expenses and spending on new infrastructure or projects?
Yeah, so the way that this works is school districts can kind of decide to do one of two different types of referenda. They can have operating referenda that are either recurring, so kind of in perpetuity, or non-recurring for a set amount of years to authorize up to a certain amount in new property tax levies. The other kind of referendum they can do would be a debt referendum, which would be more focused on capital projects, things like building improvements, new buildings, renovations, things like that. So what we see generally with these is that there tends to be a lot more authorized for the debt referenda than there do for the operating referendum. You can think of the expenses that would come along with a new building or, pricey building renovations. So what we saw this fall was that there was up to $1.4 billion in new debt that was authorized to be spent on those things like new buildings. And then there was about $300 million that was authorized in operating revenues, potential new property taxes that would fund day-to-day operations.
In terms of where the bulk of these referendums, whether school or otherwise, are happening, and in terms of also where they're passing, are there any regional trends to take note of here?
I think one of the things to keep in mind with school district referenda especially is that a large number, a vast majority of school districts have held at least one referendum since 2016 within just the last 6 years. These are passing really all around the state. We have a map up on our website where you can kind of see where the operating referenda passed throughout 2022. And I think you see a couple of regional trends. The Madison area tends to garner a lot of these. You had a number of districts that are kind of surrounding the city of Madison that passed an operating referendum this year. You see kind of a cluster in Walworth County too, and kind of the Lake Geneva area. But I think one of the things that you can see with this map is that this is not a trend that's limited to one specific area of the state or a couple of specific areas. There are really school districts that are in all corners of the state that are passing referendum.
Where does a rising trend like this, though, stop? I mean, the forum has been reporting and researching for a while on referendums, school referendums. Mm-hmm. What is it that makes taxpayers so willing to increase their own tax burden?
Yeah, this is such a great question. In terms of where it stops, I think with school districts especially, one of the things that we've seen is that not only have, within the last couple of years, we've reached a really high number of referenda on ballots. This year, I believe there were somewhere over 130 that were sent out to voters, over 130 that were approved, somewhere in the ballpark of 150 or 160 that were on ballots. That's something generally, those numbers we've seen in each of the last couple of general, either midterm or presidential election years, so 2020 and 2018 as well, had very high numbers. And then not only did you have a high number of those on ballots, but you had in each of those 3 years, 2018, 2020, 2022, at least 80% of them passed. So more than 4 out of 5 school districts that have a referendum on the ballot are passing them. You have a very high number. It's really hard to say, when this trend is going to slow down. It's hard to go up very much from 80%. That's quite a high level of approval. So I think, when you're looking at why this is happening, I think you see a lot of this is happening on a very local level. You have schools that are going to their communities and saying, we really need this one specific thing, are asking, being very specific, having these local campaigns. But you see a lot of this passing, I think, in relation to kind of the way that the state deals with school district revenue. One of the kind of background things that's happening here is the state is responsible for setting the level of the per pupil revenue limit for school districts. And in general, over the last couple of years, that has not kept up with the rate of inflation. So you have, and property taxes and state aid, kind of the two biggest categories of revenue for school districts, are underneath that revenue limit. So when that's not keeping up with inflation, you have pressures on schools to keep teacher salaries competitive, make sure that you have teachers that are sticking around and have have, school operations that are up to standards. And I think voters are clearly recognizing that the case that the schools are laying out is one that is worthwhile. They're supporting it. And again, it's not just happening in one area; it's happening in all areas throughout the state.
Ari, always good to have you on the show. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, we'll be right back.